Hi, this is Melissa from Loops of Gray, and today in this video we're going to be making these mini heart coasters. Specifically, I'm making these as part of my Pride Stitch Along. So we've got over here a Progress Pride flag that we're going to make by sewing strips together, and then here this is just a sort of a fun kind of painted one that's just plain. Oh, not plain fabric, but just the rectangles are not pieced, they're just plain rectangles. And you can see they've got a solid back that's, pretty plain. And then for the quilting on this one, we're going to just quilt horizontal lines across each stripe. And for this one is the same horizontal lines, but then also adding vertical lines to form a grid. So this all comes together sewing straight lines and quilting straight lines. So if you can cut a rectangle, sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and sew a straight line, you can make these coasters no problem. What fabric you'll need is two 4.5 inch or two 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangles for the main heart. If you're making the Progress Pride flag, you are going to need 8 strips, each of which are 1 inch by 4.5. No. If you're making the Progress flag heart, you are going to need 8 strips, each of which is 1 inch by 5 inches. And yeah, as you can see, I've just gone with kind of whatever fabric I had in my stash. This will end up sewing together and cutting into these rectangles. But first we have to make kind of the main fabric, and then we'll cut it into this size. And this is for the inside part of the heart here. For the background, we will need 2 1-inch squares. So here's for one, and then here's for our other one. And this part will get used up in the top corners over here. 2 1.25 inch squares. Here we go. And then these will get used for the center kind of part here. Then we need 2 2.5 inch squares, and these get used to make the bottom parts of the heart. Okay, and then for the borders, we're going to need 2 strips that are 1 inch by 4.5 inches, and that'll be one of the sides, one of each side. And then 2 strips that are 1 inch by 5.5 inches, and that'll be the borders on the top and the bottom. Okay, and then for the backing, we're going to use a 5.5 inch square. Decided to go with something real fun on these, and that's, like I said, just the back that's relatively plain. And then to actually quilt it, you'll need a square that is about 7 inches. Square doesn't have to be exact. This just gives you more room when you put it on to do some quilting over the edges, because you cut it to be exactly the same size, it can be kind of hard if the fabric shifts around. So cutting it at 7 inches square gives you a little bit easier area to work with. The first thing to do for the Progress Pride flag is we're going to sew each of these strips together, and we're going to sew them together each with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I use this 1/4 inch foot on my machine, but you can obviously make your mark however works best for you. And so we're going to start at the bottom with the purple and blue and put our right sides together and just sew with this easy 1/4 inch seam allowance. And from here you can either press your seams as you go, and we're going to press these open to reduce bulk. We're going to press them open. You can, like I said, you can either do this all at once or sew all your strips and then iron them all at the same time. And now that we've got all of our strips sewn together, we're going to cut it into 2 pieces that are, like I said, 2.5 by 4.5, just like the pieces that we're going to do on the other coaster. And here are our 2 rectangles. Then the next thing that we're going to do is to draw a diagonal line on the back of each square. And I like to put down a little post-it note so I'm not drawing on my mat. So for each square, we're just going to draw, take your ruler, go across the diagonal, and just draw a line right there. And then we're going to repeat that for all of the other squares. All right, now that we have all of our pieces ready and marked up, we're going to place them. I'm going to show you where we're going to place them onto the little rectangles. So first, the 1-inch squares go in the outer corners, and they get placed on with the diagonals like this, so that this is the center, and then these are the outside parts, and the diagonal lines go this way. And then obviously same for this side. And you want to make sure you put your right sides together. There we go. And you can pin those if you want, or they stay pretty well. And then the 1 1/4 inch squares, they get placed on the inner portion of the heart, and the diagonal lines on this will go and face this way, face down into the middle of the heart. And then lastly, our 2.5 inch, I've got these on the wrong hearts. Let's switch those back. All right. Then we're going to place the 2.5 inch squares on the bottom portion of the hearts, and they're going to go where the diagonal is facing this way, and then this way. And you can kind of already see how the heart is going to be taking shape on this. Let's go this way and this way. So the next steps are to sew on each of these lines, not any sort of seam allowance or anything. So you're going to sew directly on that line. So here's what I mean. We're going to put the square, take one of the pieces that we had, and here we've got, you can see the diagonal line, and we're going to, like I said, sew directly on that line. I'm not using the guide here in this step. We're just sewing on that line. And what I like to do is to chain piece. So here I'm going to grab the next 1¼ inch square, and again just sewing on that line. And we're gonna keep going on. So all the 4 different 1¼ inch pieces. And we'll just cut those apart. And then now we're gonna sew the 1 inch pieces on the other side. And again, we're just gonna sew on the line all the way through. And lastly, we're gonna take our largest piece and put that on the bottom. And if you don't remember which way it goes, the smaller square is on the kind of the outside, and the larger, the 1¼ inch square, is on the sort of inside of the heart. So that means you want the point, this point down here on this side, to be at the bottom, and the one that's on the outside, you want that corner to be up here. And so that's how you know, because again, it kind of makes that heart shape around. And let's go ahead and sew on the line. The next step for the coasters is to then trim the excess fabric from these seam lines. And we'll do so with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you want to make sure that you're cutting the excess fabric, not, because you want to keep this portion of it and you're cutting off this portion. And so you just line it up with your 1/4 inch on your seam line, and then you're going to cut the rest of it off. And when you iron it, you'll see how the heart is starting to take shape. And again, we'll cut the outside corners off of all of these seams here. And again, yeah, we'll iron this open, and you can see here's the right half of one of the hearts. And I'll go ahead and cut and press all of these, and I'll be back. All right, and now that we've got each half of the heart sewn and pressed, or cut and pressed, then obviously we're gonna then fold these sides together and sew along this side of the seam, press that open, and we'll have our finished heart. And now that we've got our completed hearts, we're going to add the borders. And so we'll do, it doesn't really matter, it's a square at this point, but you know, you can do first we'll sew on the short borders, either top and bottom, you know, or you can sew them onto the left and right first. It doesn't really matter. But first we're going to sew the short borders on, and then after that we'll sew the long borders on the remaining 2 sides. And that will be our finished top. So I'll be back after I sew and press these. All right, we've got the 2 fronts of our coasters all finished, and it's time to get going on the quilting part. So what we're gonna do is take our 7-inch piece of batting, and we're just gonna place the heart just kind of centered on top, and that's really about it. The fabric grips itself pretty well. You could do a little bit of spray basting if you wanted, but it's such a small piece that, you know, I don't find that to be really worth it. So again, we're just placing our coaster just sort of in the middle. And what we're going to do for this heart is we're going to do a sort of a grid work design that goes on every every 1/2 inch. So we're going to sew 1/2 inch up and down this way, and then a 1/2 inch across this way. For the Progress Pride flag heart, we're going to do something similar to what we did here, where we're only going to do the 1/2 inch. Well, on this one, I followed the stripe lines, which I think they are 1/2 inch. Yep. So on this, we're just going to go across, following the lines of the stripes and just quilting it across. And so we'll go over to the sewing machine, and I'll show you what that looks like. So to start, we're going to make our first line right here on this at the where the border goes. And I'm not using my guide here again. I'm just following the center of the stitch, and we're just going to go right along this top edge right here. And then you'll just keep going off of the mat, or off of the fabric and onto the binding. You're going to lift up, turn around, go down about your 1/2 inch, turn again, and then we're going to follow now the stripe the line in between the black and the brown stripes. Again, just following on that line. Go past, turn, stitch down about a 1/2 inch, turn again, and now we'll go between the brown and the red stripes. And you'll just keep going back and forth until you get down to the end of the coaster. And here it is, all done. If stitching on the line, you don't really see the quilting very much, but it's all held down, and it's going to be good to go. And we will do the same across lines on the other one, and I'll show you that when that's finished. Actually, I wanted to show you a little tip for how I know how far my next line should be. It was pretty easy for this first line. It's right on that edge. The second line goes right at the corner of this triangle here. But then what I do is I just take a ruler, kind of make sure I'm lined up to where the next 1/2 inch mark is along my center line of my needle, and I just sort of get started and measure maybe every once in a while down the down the row to make sure I'm staying on track. But in general, if your sewing machine goes straight, it should stay straight pretty much the whole time, and you can kind of eyeball it for most of the row. And now that we're at the end of doing the horizontal lines, we're going to kind of travel around, so just kind of move down here and then move over here to where we're now in line with this border seam right here. And so then we're just going to sew along that line, and then every 1/2 inch all the way the rest of the way across. And when you get to the center, it's important to note that the next set of lines will not go along the exact center here. They'll actually go along a 1/4 inch on either side. So here's my one line here. I'm going to have my 1/2 inch line will be kind of right here, and then the next 1/2 inch line will be a 1/4 inch away on this side of this center seam. So you will not be sewing down this center seam. And here are the finished quilted tops. So next step will be to trim these to 5.5 inches square to match the size of the backing that we're going to do, and then we're going to sew the backs and the fronts together. So what we're going to do with the fronts and the backs is we're going to place the backs on top of the fronts, so right sides together. This one I want to make sure is facing the right way, not that it super matters on a coaster. So we're going to place those again right sides together, and we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around kind of 3.5 sides. So maybe start here at the bottom, sew over to here, all the way up this side, all the way across the top, all the way down, and maybe stopping about here. So you want to leave, you know, a couple inches of gap in your seam so that we can turn it inside out once we're done. So here you can see at the bottom where I started my seam here, went all the way around, and then now we're back here. And what I like to do before I start turning it is to trim these corners off. You can use scissors or your roto cutter and just sort of clip these corners, making sure that you don't cut into the stitch line. This just makes for a neater finish when you turn it inside out. So we'll cut all of those. Doesn't have to be super exact, but it does help. And then to turn it inside out, it's pretty easy. You just kind of push it through. Like that. And then you can use your fingers to, you know, just poke out the corners. Or what I like to use is a crochet hook, pretty small, and use the little tip of the hook to push out a really straight corner on all four corners. There we go. Okay, and then we'll have to give this a good press where we make sure to fold under the opening so that it lies, I don't get that thread in there, so that it you know, fold it under a 1/4 inch so that it lies, you know, flush even with the rest of your edge. So let's head over to the iron. So here we are over at the iron, and you can see, like I said, you kind of fold it about a 1/4 inch under on each side so that when you give it a good press, it lies, you know, pretty flat and even before we go to top stitch it. And you can, I like to iron it, you know, with some steam and iron it. Oh, we got a little peeking out, so we'll retuck that in. And we will set that on both sides. And and here is the other coaster. So again, we're going to tuck in about our 1/4 inch or so. Let's get this a little more even and go ahead and give this good press. Make it nice and flat. Press it from the other side as well. All right, and now all that's left to do, we'll give this a little bit more of a better press there. And so now all that's left to do is to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch all the way around the edges, and that will close this seam here, and then also give the edges a really nice finish. And here we have it, our finished coasters. Front and back is just really simple, nothing fancy, but you know, that didn't really take that long at all to make, and they're really functional and cute, and I hope you give these a try soon. I'd love to see your makes. Post them on hashtag Pride Stitch Along and hashtag Loops of Gray, and I look forward to seeing what you made. Thanks!